morning and welcome to the CADclass podcast. I'm Josh.
I'm Jake.
And that's...
And I'm Joe Street or Josiah.
Joe Street, you're
Nailed
on
it.
the flip side. I mean, I guess that's not really the meaning of on the flip side, but
Yeah, you know.
welcome to the pod. It is so good to have a community member. And I've got an O from Aaron Rosen. I don't know if that's the Joe Street O. I hope it is. But
yeah, dude.
Well, I'm definitely glad to be here. So it's going to be a fun time.
PC
so
Van
this is
Vliet
podcast
Joe
number
Street.
30. Number 30 and our first guest.
Number 30.
Yeah. Hey, I feel honored.
No, not our first guest. Not our first guest. I hate to be the burster.
That's true from the Prusa.
Fine,
we had
whatever.
We had one of our good buddies on here. I'd like to do this a little bit more, but it's nice to highlight somebody from our community. And Joe Street, I think you have been sharing the progress of the bot that you were making. Rabid of the shirt, the Richmond area bot instigated destruction. I like that.
We're going over all
I'm having a good time with that acronym. But really quickly, a little housekeeping, and then we'll dive in, ask you some questions, and interact with people in the chat as usual. So, little housekeeping. I want to say hello to people in the chat. So, good morning, Cadence. Good morning, Spitfire. I've actually been talking. So it turns out Spitfire lives here like 20 minutes from where I am, and somebody that I know in the area put me in touch with him. Didn't know that he already was working through some of our stuff. And he was like, oh, yeah, I actually already know the CADclass guys. I attend their podcast. And so I've had a couple back and forths with him. What's interesting about Spitfire is he works on planes, RC planes. And there's an RC Fest coming up here in Sacramento. And so he's got some really interesting knowledge. I'd like to bring him on the pod at some point, too, around filaments that actually expand as they go through the nozzle so that they're lighter. Right. So it's like weight reduction.
PLA foam.
So good morning, Spitfire. Good morning, Sam. Sam said he's buying a vacuum pot today for silicon molding. That's progress. Dairy.
Vacuum pots
good morning.
Are really weird
PC
stuff.
Van Vliet, printed by John. I don't know if I said Aaron already. Cornelia, Ogre. Dude. Did I miss anybody? Adrian.
Good group.
We got most of them. I think we got most of them.
I think we got most everyone.
With that out of the way, welcome to the pod, Justry.
Oh, yeah. Like I said, always glad to be here and interact with you guys. It's definitely a little bit weird to be on screen, but, I can work with it.
That's all good, man. So I think this podcast is going to be super duper organic. So we're just going to have just a really rad kind of conversation with the main robotics guy in our entire Discord. Super, super excited. I've got a bunch of interview questions, some of which are hot takes on robotics. But this weekend, you guys had a really fantastic big event. So you want to tell us a little bit about that, Joe Street?
Yeah, so my group Rabid, we had an event on March 2nd that had two different small scale combat robotics classes, 1 pound full combat class and a 1 pound 3D printed plastic class, which is what the Codebreaker designed, the shuffle pod that I've been designing and sharing in the Discord was primarily used for. As you guys can see,
so much fun to see.
100%.
Build it. It's been amazing.
Yeah, so this is the completed pod. This was one of the spares I didn't end up needing to use, but it was all assembled, all built, ready to go. And I actually brought along Codebreaker as well.
Hey!
So I have him here.
I have a question.
He's surprisingly large. Yes, Jeff.
Oh, and for all those in the chat, so if you haven't seen already, so Joestry, if you look up Joestry, you can actually search in our Discord for Joestry. He has posted updates around how he made some of those shuffle pod mechanisms. So if you haven't gotten a chance to look at that, you should totally check that out.
So fantastic.
My question is Codebreaker.
Yes. All right. My combat robotics team name was kind of chosen because I'm into electrical engineering. I love computer programming. So my team name ended up being Task Failed Successfully, which is by far one of the more popular computer memes out there. And I was like, all right, well, what's kind of code related, but and so after a whole bunch of projecting, I just ended up choosing Codebreaker. And Codebreaker itself, the name has actually been attached to a couple of different bot designs which I actually can kind of share my screen on. I have a couple of
let's see it.
Couple of photos here. Yes, share screen. It's going to be this guy, the show and tell. All right, let me close out of that. So I started designing combat robotics back in beginning of early April 2023, so about a year ago. And this was one of my very, very first designs. This is what Codebreaker originally was. It was just a pretty roughly sketched up design in Fusion 360. I had touched Fusion maybe once or twice before.
That's really impressive to go from very little expertise to that.
Yeah, so I kind of designed it to be semi-modular. So if parts were to be broken, I could pull out like the top plate or bottom plate or whatever and just, throw a piece in to keep it going. So that was one of my prototypes there. And it ended up being this right here. So as you can see, very similar to the CAD design that I showed you first. But after 2 events with that design, I was like, all right, I know I can do better. I can clean it up. I can refine it. So I have
what were the top, like what was cleaning it up?
So for me, it just was like I wasn't too satisfied with the shape and profile, and it was too boxy. The sides were very square, which meant if another horizontal came at me, or even if a vertical spinner ended up coming at my side, it would be very easy for them to get under me and just launch me into the air.
Got some nooks and crannies that you don't really need.
Exactly. So it went through a drastic change probably about 2 or 3 months ago. It ended up, let me jump over to the next one. So it essentially had a very similar build structure to what it is now, except instead of the shuffler pods, it was the wheels. Because
so what is the advantage of the shuffler wheels over just kind of standard tires?
Yeah, I'm doing the same thing.
So for shuffle pods in the smaller weight classes, I'm not too sure about like the big battle bots you would see in like on TV and the Discovery Channel. But for shuffle pods for like the 1 pound up to, I believe, like the 12 pound, having a shuffler mechanism actually gives you a weight bonus. So that weight bonus is usually used to compensate for the additional weight that the shuffle mechanisms would end up including. But generally, if you play it right and if you design it well, you can actually get even more weight that you can distribute to your weapon, to your armor, just to make it more structurally sound. So
just a quick question coming in printed by John. How big is it?
That's a good question. So I have a Elegoo Neptune 4 printer, and I'm able to, and that printer has a 230 by 230 width print bed, and the black section of Codebreaker here is just barely able to fit it. So
it's about 9 inches wide, about
9 to 10 inches wide, and then I think it's about 6 or 7 inches long from tip to tail. So it's surprisingly large. This almost weighs exactly 1.5 pounds after doing all the upgrades and all that. So fantastic. And the weapon, which so if any of my like co-chair members see, there is no battery in this, so it's completely disarmed. I'm not gonna. Because we have the rule that if there's a weapon on a bot, battery has to be out or it has to be locked up. Yeah. There's nothing in there.
It's like firearm rules, where it's like, you have to treat it like it's always loaded.
100%, yeah, because you don't want to accidentally get hurt while handling a robot. Yeah. So Codebreaker's weapon, after getting the 1.5 pound, the 1.5 pound weight limit. The weapon itself weighs about 110 grams. Compared
That's
to
really significant.
Without the shuffle pod bonus, when it had wheels, the weapon was only allowed to be, the weapon only was able to be about 80 grams. So with the shuffle mechanism, I was able to add an additional 30 grams into the weapon mass just to give it that extra kick.
Nice.
So with the event over the weekend, we had a very good show turnout. We had 17 plastic ants and I believe 8 full combat robots. The full combat robots, that was the first time that we ended up having that class. And honestly, we had on average, probably give or take about 50 spectators at a time. The retention rate was there. We had just a good showing. Probably more than 100 people showed. Just
That's fantastic.
Robot destruction. So it was a ton of fun. If you guys have the opportunity, I definitely recommend it. It's just a fun time, just watching people's designs go into a box and just duel until they die, essentially.
Which is everyone's favorite thing. I really didn't. I wasn't. I was never really into combat robots as a kid. I was like, yeah, that kind of exists, because I'd seen them just randomly scrolling through TV, and it was just kind of like, oh, that exists. And then I saw Junkyard Wars when I was a kid, and I was like, oh, that's kind of cool as well. And then, but it never really kind of deeply seeded. It was just always like, well, those are big machines, and they're all electronic and mechanical and welding, and I don't know anything about that.
Right.
Like, it's so kind of far off as a concept. I just never really thought about it. And then just in the last couple of years, I just started watching the show and kind of getting more and more kind of deep into all the communities. I'm like, wow, these are not, I mean, obviously they're sophisticated in their design. That's tremendously sophisticated. But in the electronics, which kind of spooks me a little bit, not that difficult, actually. It's a couple motors for some wheels, a motor for a weapon, a receiver, a remote, a battery control board, and then an ESC to kind of modulate the motors. It's only a handful of components. It's not that kind of wicked. It's very accessible.
100%. Yeah, it's honestly super easy, especially if you're doing a very basic design. There's so many great communities out there that do like combat robotics at the small scale. If you jump into any single one of them and you ask, hey, where do I get started? I guarantee you will get 100 different people who are there willing to help and give you information on how to design your first combat robot, all the way down from the 150 gram robot class, which I can't go that small, up to the 250-pound class. There's such a huge collection of information out there that you can use.
So that's one of the first things that I actually wanted to ask you about, just because I have a bit of information coming into it. I don't know about Josh, but kind of learning more and more about combat robotics, especially in the fights and especially more in like the TV show BattleBots. I've just kind of learned that it's significantly more about, or more similar to, a sport than people recognize. So what you were talking about earlier, just like boxing or fighting, there's weight classes. Like, it would be silly to pit a 250-pound robot against like a nano weight, like a 25 gram. Like, that's ridiculous. You would match kind of similar weight classes, because it kind of levels out. Well, like, oh, well, you've got faster wheels, or, you know, a lighter frame, or a heavier weapon. And it does kind of all settle out to be a fairly even match weight-wise. But then kind of going into the show, there's time limits, just like boxing. There's if you've got a competition where you have multiple fights in one day, you have to take your robot to the pits and work on it and reassemble it, which is fantastically similar to F1. All of my family in the UK, all of us watch F1 and racing. It's just so popular. And it's a team sport. It's not just a driver. It's all the engineers that are literally swapping out parts faster than you can blink, and thinking about the aerodynamics and the mechanical engineering and everything that goes behind it. It is so much more involved than just, two robots kind of smashing at each other. It's got quite a lot of sportsmanship as well. Like in the show, as soon as the game is over, you'll have one person that's still alive, and then one robot that is sometimes on fire. And at the end of it, as soon as the one person is kind of claimed victor, the two kind of come together and they just shake hands and they hug and they're all kind of smiley, and it's really it's a really lovely kind of atmosphere.
Yeah, it's the community honestly is super amazing with combat robotics. Everyone, while the goal is to do as much damage to your opponent 99% of the time, everyone's having a blast, and like you expect your robot to take some damage. So and it's always very sportsmanlike. I 100% respect the community, and everyone's super friendly and welcoming. Even people, I personally haven't interacted with too many of them, but even the people up at the 250-pound class who are fighting on the BattleBots TV show, if you run into them at any sort of like the rep festivals or open sauce or anything like that, they're all super friendly. And if you have questions about combat robotics, they will take a minute and they will tell you anything that you might have questions on. They will help you out. It's such a great community.
And I think that's like, if I can zoom out and talk about, because a lot of people are here originally to learn CAD, some of them now 3D printing, but if I can zoom out a little bit, one of the things that Jake and I talk about quite a bit is when you want to learn something new, community is essential. It's not a nice to have. It's an essential. And it's one of those things that pushes your own learning. And then you connect with somebody else and they say, have you considered, or there's this website, or I would call this person, or, you know, I ran into that problem and I had this thing, and you just save countless hours. And so anybody looking to learn CAD, anybody looking to really dive in deeper and build that fundamental knowledge, like combat robotics is amazing. RC is amazing. Find your community, find your people. And and the fact that it's a competition too is even better. So if you can find a community that competes and enter yourself into those competitions, there's no way you're not going to get better. It's like you have to get better. So I love that.
Just continuing on the community aspect, especially in the higher weight class, some things that I've learned is that a lot of TV shows that are kind of known for building stuff, apparently in the off season when they're not filming their TV show, there's huge people who will build robotics and no,
I got such a funny image in my mind. Huge people,
not massive people, people that are huge in their industry. Para example, when we went to open source last year in San Francisco, they had Grant Imahara's last BattleBot that he was working on. Very sadly passed away. He was huge. Him and his entire team. Apparently, all of the Mythbusters teams, they all worked with him on his BattleBot all through the 90s, all through the 2000s. They were all working on it, even when they were at ILM. Like, they would literally be working 12-hour days building R2-D2s for the prequels, and then at lunch break and at night they would just be making BattleBots. And I'm like, that's amazing. That's such a rad kind of community to be involved in.
Is it manual RC control, or does it have some autonomous control?
All right. So for Codebreaker specifically,
right, he says yes.
I'm diving into it. So for Codebreaker specifically, it is completely RC controlled. I have a transmitter, and inside of Codebreaker, there's a receiver. And it's pretty much just use the joysticks. One joystick is the motion controls, and then the other one is for the speed of the weapon.
That's the other bit. It doesn't really matter if your bot is more technologically superior. If you're not a good driver, the other guy is has the advantage. Absolutely.
And it's also it's incredible too, because even robots that don't have spinning weapons. So I mean, Codebreaker is a horizontal spinner, so its purpose is essentially to hit the side of a robot as hard as it possibly can. But there are robots in the Norwalk Havoc Combat League, which is up in Norwalk, Connecticut. I guess it's National Havoc, whatever. They have some really great top tier control robots, which just essentially have an electronic lifter, where the point of them is to just grab your robot, keep it under control, because there's 3 different scoring factors to combat robotics pretty much overall, which is aggression, damage, and control. So as long as you essentially are able to dominate 2 of those categories, whether that be control and aggression or aggression and damage, you can go very far. And there's so many great examples of both kinetic and non-kinetic weapons just going to the top and winning tournaments all over the US and around the world.
Yeah, and I can definitely, just to continue off this bit far, I can see, potentially in a year or so, some AI self-driving subsect of combat robots where it's just like, you just kind of let it go and see what happens. But I don't think it would be anywhere near as fun. The whole point of like having a team and having, someone manning it.
And it's like there's so many ways that it could go wrong too. Right. So it's like you could imagine you go in there and it's like, well, sometimes I think in the lamest way possible. So I wonder, because they're difficult programming challenges, right? So as you injure the bot a little bit, does it stop driving? Do they just stand on opposite sides of the arena?
Does it know that one wheel is stripped?
It's like that last mile problem where you can get it to do certain things and but what happens when you actually stress test it? I could imagine it being like super fun to play around with that. And then all of a sudden everybody goes to the arena and they're like, wow, this was lame. This was not as fun as I thought.
Yeah, for fully autonomous, there have been a couple of robots that I can think of. There's one that's in the smaller scale robots that has competed not too long ago, I believe, over the same weekend we were having our event. The National Havoc group up in Connecticut, they also had an autonomous robot that had a camera looking down in the arena to kind of try to control that. So, and even in the BattleBots website, BattleBots show, they had this thing called like the Destructathon, or there was a couple of different names for it over the summer. But the Hacksmith, I'm not sure if you know of the YouTube, the Hacksmith, they created a BattleBot that was supposed to be fully autonomous as well. So it's definitely something that is being experimented with, but it's definitely not as practical yet because the technology and the weight that you have to include into your robot in order for it to actually be viable is just not quite there yet.
And I don't think it's as fun. I think it's actually beneficial to have a person behind the robot.
Yeah.
I want to go back to you, Joe Street. I want to know how you actually got started in combat robots and what is your background? Do you have electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, or kind of pure hobbyist just desire to kind of make a robot?
Yeah, so for my experience, I kind of grew up watching BattleBots. I found it on Hulu when it was on Hulu, and I watched through all of the old seasons. And Robot Wars, I believe, was a British version of that as well.
Yeah. It was on Central as well.
I think so. Yeah. So I watched a lot of that. I really loved the whole mechanical aspect of it, but it was just that. It was just a fun show that I enjoyed watching for a very long time. But growing up, I worked with Legos and Kinects, which I think we talked about when I was announced as a moderator on the Discord. And I've always been very mechanically minded, and I've always enjoyed trying to experiment with Arduino projects and stuff like that. So fundamentally, I did have a little bit, a very, very rough knowledge in exactly. So I had the smallest amount of knowledge in electrical engineering. I knew a small amount of Fusion 360. And I kind of just wasn't sure where to go. And my original mindset was how am I ever going to be able to afford to build a 250-pound robot? So around I'd like to think around January or February of last year, I was all right, I've been saying I want to build a robot or something. I want to see BattleBots in real life. Yeah. How can I do that? So the place that I went, most people go, Google. I just Googled combat robotics near me or robot combat near me, and I happened to stumble across the Rabid Discord.
I assumed you and your crew kind of made it from scratch.
No, so the CEO of Rabid, since we're now a nonprofit, the CEO Corey, he actually had started it because he'd been in the small scale combat robotics for a while. There's a couple of other groups in like the Maryland, New Jersey, and like Atlanta, Georgia area, and like the Carolinas that have groups. But he's like, those are too far away. So I want to create something that I can do closer to Richmond, which is where we're stationed. So I happened to just stumble across their Discord. I was like, hey, when's the next event? And they're like, all right, well, it's April now. Our next event's going to be in July. So that's when I really buckled down and designed that first design, the blue and green design infusion that I shared at the beginning of the podcast. Most of the electronic components actually came from a pre-built electronics kit off of one of the combat robotics distributors, essentially FingerTech Robotics. Not sponsored to say that.
Wars.
Yeah. So I bought a pre-built kit, which was a little tiny wedge-shaped robot. I was like, all right, this is cool and all, but it's not something that I want to compete with because like I want damage. I don't want to just go in with a wedge.
Is that is that the equivalent of somebody buying a 3D printer and just finding files online and going, I'm just going to print files that I find online, and then having that realization that, oh, wait a second.
I want more.
It's way more fun to build your own robot, in my personal opinion and from my own experience. Don't get me wrong.
The most like childish boy sentence in the world.
True. Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. Kits definitely do serve a good purpose, which their purpose is to get people into combat robotics.
Oh yeah.
But once you're in it and you get a taste for it, you almost migrate very quickly into, okay, how can I make my own robot? How can I make this kit that I bought better?
The gateway drug.
Exactly. It's the gateway drug. And like once you have the basic components, you can just build off of that. And that's what I did with my first robot.
So you started, you started by getting interested, Googling it, and then you said, let me buy a kit so that I can compete in the next event.
Mm-hmm.
So what was the progression after the kit? Like what exactly did you do next?
Well, the kit, I literally assembled it. I drove it around my room, like for like 10 or 20
breaking
minutes.
Chair legs, cutting up ankles.
Mostly ankles, honestly. But no, so I started off just driving the kit, getting kind of familiar with the RC style control because I never really had been into the RC world. I knew that's where you kind of needed to have some knowledge and understanding of how to move a robot around a arena, but like I'd never experienced it personally. But shortly after, I was like, it just didn't quite like scratch that itch. I just wanted to build something else, and that's where I kind of just was like, all right. I asked my Discord group, I was like, how do you get started designing your own robot? And most of them were like, just start drawing in Fusion, and as you like come up with the design ideas, send them to us and we can give you critiques essentially, which is where the community comes into.
I really, really love that. I definitely I know it scares a lot of people when they're learning a new tool or learning a new program or getting into a different field. But diving into the deep end, as scary as it is the best way to learn things.
100%.
And I feel like
deep.
I feel too this is going to be a bit of a hot take maybe, but we're in this moment in time where people really desperately want things immediately. And I think you're seeing some of that with AI, right? And you're seeing, I would imagine some people will now approach this going, well, can AI build me a robot? And like, how do I program? And it almost misses the point. It's not that you shouldn't try to do it. It's not that like these tools are certainly useful, but it's like all of the interesting stuff is in learning how to do it, in diving into those details, in struggling and failing and suffering, literally suffering a lot of the times, going, why doesn't this do it? Who do I ask? Where do I go? This sucks. This is horrible. Nothing works. And you come out the other end going, wow, I really worked hard to get this thing off the ground and to understand something about it. And because of that, it's like the same with writing. I think a lot of people that are now relying on ChatGPT to do all their writing have stopped thinking about what they're going to say, have stopped really caring and investing themselves in the process of figuring something out, of communicating with somebody else. And so I just love this idea that despite the fact that AI will solve a lot of problems for us, and certainly as a handy little helper, you probably want to dive in still to the OG tools like CAD, even as those 3D models become easier and easier to make elsewhere, you're always going to want it. So, sorry, just a bit of a hot take.
No. I think that is exactly the hot take people need. It starts out. I don't think it's too far to say that it starts out as an artistic endeavor.
Oh, it totally
design wise.
Totally does.
Obviously, it's a mechanical and electronic robot, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't have any intrinsic artistic design elements.
And you have to reconcile this idea. You have to reconcile this idea that like I have this artistic vision and I can't realize it. I'm not at the stage where I can get this thing to where my brain says it should be, and you have to deal with the consequences of going through that journey.
And for me, for designing my first robot, the one thing I forgot to mention is like I went to YouTube and immediately got overwhelmed by all the Fusion tutorials that are out there. So like I did what I could with what I had. Like you saw the first design; it was pretty good for someone who barely touched Fusion.
I think it looks great as a design.
Like it was hard. It took so long to design that thing, and like I was building around the components that I had to. That was another thing that I was doing with my first design, because I didn't want to invest too much into the hobby if I wasn't going to actually be, locked in and fully committed to it. So my first robot was definitely very rough. But right around the time I watched 3D Printing General's YouTube video on your CAD class is when I really was like, let me upgrade.
It no longer exists anymore, unfortunately.
I know. It's awful. But he went through the whole book in what, like 2 weeks?
A week.
A week.
We told him he was crazy. Yeah. We're like, you're not. That's I don't know what sort of torture you're trying to put yourself through. But
it was ridiculous. But yeah, so I stumbled across that, and then I hopped into your community Discord, and that's where I kind of like started looking through the book, figuring out ways of redesigning Codebreaker from the ground up. And that's where the model that I have right now really stems from, is just realizing X, Y, and Z part of Codebreaker version 1 just was not working. It was not practical. How can I make it better? How can I make it fit me better? And
so
like,
it's not a linear process, is what you're saying. It's
not at
a little
all.
here, get a little
highly
bit there.
Recursive.
Yeah, it's like you sort of loop around and hope that you're looping up.
That's why I really dig seeing like evolutions year on year of like of those kind of on TV bots, because it's like they'll start off kind of early, and then after the show, after they seriously get destroyed and beaten up, they go, oh, okay, we actually learned we need to, change this design. We need to make this thicker. We can actually pull some weight. Those wheels are in the wrong area. They're too small. Blah, 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 blah. And it just progressively gets meaner and meaner and meaner as it evolves. It's really fantastic to see.
That's kind of what was going on with my shuffle pods, especially. Like you guys saw, I was posting once a week on different upgrades and modifications that I was making to this. It was, let me be honest, it was iteration hell. It took so many iterations to make something that would actually move and function the way I needed it to the day of.
Did you have to program those? Was there, what does it look like to get those things to move?
Yeah, so what it is let me see if I can get closer to the camera. So what it is it's a brushless drone motor right here. And this brushless drone motor is powering a chain of gears. I should have gotten a lighter color model, but it's a train of gears that go to essentially a camshaft. And that camshaft has different lobes on it that each pair of feet, because there's a top foot and a bottom foot.
Yeah.
Each pair of feet is connected to that cam.
So the cam is connected to the top and the bottom foot.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it gets flipped upside down.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as the drone motor just spins, these feet each take a turn touching the ground, and as they touch the ground, they kind of shift forward a little bit and then retract up. So it's this repeating down, forward, up, back, down, forward, up, back motion that kind of propels me forward.
So
but
I mean, who figured this out? Like, how did you? This looks like a centipede style motion, right? Is this?
Yeah.
I wonder if it was inspired.
It's very biomechanic.
It is. Yeah.
So it is. This design is not a new design made by me. There have been other robots in other like combat competitions that have had very similar drives. What's unique to this is it's essentially, aside from the little silicone socks that are on the top of the feet, this whole module is 3D printed. Oh, and like the metal bolts and the metal cam, the axle that I use. So I pretty much pulled a design from a metal shuffling pod, compressed it down to what it is now, and just 3D printed it.
What do you mean you pulled a design from it? What does that mean?
I watched a YouTube short 20 different times until I kind of like,
frame by frame.
So it pretty much, it was frame by frame. I was like, let me see if, based off of how the feet are moving in this frame by frame, can I kind of reverse engineer it by first drawing what I think it might be on paper and then going into Fusion and testing it.
Joe Street, did you put your calipers up to your screen?
No, I did not do that. But
every engineer that I know has said, I know I shouldn't, and I feel bad about it, but I have to admit I have held calipers up to a screen before.
Don't get me wrong, I thought about it. I really did think about it. But no, what I ended up doing was I had some graph paper next to me, and I just kind of pulled it over and just kind of like tried to do like what we do in like the end chapters of the CAD class, where you make the 2D design where it's like the side view, the front view, and all that stuff. I just kind of did that by hand because I had taken like a CAD class in high school 10 years. Wow. It was 10 years ago now.
Not sponsored by us.
No, a
different one.
High school CAD class. But yeah, so I had learned how to kind of do technical
class.
High school technical drawing class. How about that?
Yeah, no, I put the quote because it's usually just so inadequate. You get a little bit of the way there. It's nice to be introduced, but you don't get very far. So
that's kind of that's where I think the foundations of my like knowledge in computer aided drawing came from.
Bingo.
So that's where I was able to kind of build into Fusion, but I like I said, it was like 9 or 10 years ago. So I was kind of running on empty in terms of my knowledge at that point.
One thing that I do really want to ask you, so you obviously have a lot of electronics background as kind of a really good pillar to kind of stand on. I come from the exact opposite. So I come from a mechanical engineering world where electronics and software and coding, I have a bit of a fear about it. Just about going into that world, because every single time that I've tried to learn it, it's always like connect a battery to a light and a switch and there's some wires in between, complete the circuit. And it's like, I get that. And then the next thing is, okay, we're going to put in a resistor and we're going to talk about pull-up charge and we're going to do, and I'm like, huh? And to me, it's always been exponential in learning, which has always been kind of a turn off from diving deeper into it.
Right.
And like, I go, okay, I can really intuitively kind of lock down the mechanics of it, the 3D printing of it, the CAD design. I can do all of that very intuitively. But the electronics, I have a huge blank spot with. And I want to hear your kind of experience coming in from the opposite side, where you go, okay, I now need to teach myself more about 3D printing and more about CAD design and organization. How did that come about?
So for me, the electronics made a lot of sense because like, I guess I can't remember who it was. Spitfire was kind of asking about it being like RC controlled or not. Thankfully, a lot of the components we use in combat robotics are off-the-shelf parts. So we use off-the-shelf 4-channel receivers for that. off the shelf brushless or brushed ESCs. So a lot of the math pretty much comes down to how big of a battery do you need to last for 3 minutes, essentially? Because a lot of the parts you use are already so established in the fact that you don't really need too many custom pieces because they're already being pulled from other RC related hobbies. You just have to know essentially how much are my motors for drive, how much is my weapon motor going to, how many amps it's going to essentially be drawing, and how quickly that's going to chew through my battery life.
Because the battery is the heaviest bit, isn't it? Or it's most weight dependent. It's like I could have a smaller motor, but if that runs out, I'm kind of dead in the water.
It's very much a balancing game, especially for juice. I can share this story because it happened to me over the weekend with Codebreaker. With the brushless motors that I use for the shuffle pods as well as the weapon motor, this was completely an experimental day for me. I was going into it not sure if Codebreaker was going to run at all. I didn't know if it was going to just freeze up in the corner or what. But I went into my first fight. I think it was Connie saw it, or one of them saw it over the weekend. And like the shuffle pods worked fantastically. My first fight, I did very well. The horizontal spinner did exactly what it was supposed to. It undercut the wheels on the other robot, and they essentially were just incapacitated, unable to move, which was fantastic because it was a very quick fight. Now for my second fight, though, unfortunately, I was doing really well. I was dominating the field for 2.5 minutes. But at the 40-second or 30-second countdown on the clock, my weapon motor and then my shuffle pods all lost juice because I was running the weapon motor too hard. I was pretty much pushing it too hard. So instead of conserving my battery, I ended up just completely depleting it. So I was dead in the water, and I got counted out because I couldn't run anymore.
Yeah. So you're a systems engineer is what you are. Not to basically not to scare people, but like you're studying the robot as a system. Oh shoot, I spun the motor too fast and it ran out of battery. I've got a weight balance consideration to make. Like this is
I need to shed some weight somewhere else so I can make up for a larger battery.
Exactly. This is where I think
100%.
If you're in middle school, you're in high school, or you're thinking about getting into robotics and you're thinking about studying engineering, I've often thought, why don't you just replace the entire engineering program with a year of like battle bots or RC planes or something like that? Just get rid of the whole thing and go, the whole goal this year is going to be make an RC plane. You will learn everything you need to know that we could possibly teach you. You'll get that hands-on practical knowledge. You'll get that experience. You'll suffer through having to sort out why all these things don't play together in the way that you hope. And you'll come out the other end with like real knowledge, not this pretend stuff.
100%. And honestly, like I feel like I have personally learned more about mechanical and electrical engineering in the past almost exactly a year now that I've been doing combat robotics than I have just watching YouTube videos, because I'm actively like, all right, well, that didn't work. How can I make it better? Because I've had so many in the 1 year that I've been designing Codebreaker, I've had so many different ways that Codebreaker has broken that like it's incredible. Like it's absolutely ridiculous how many different ways a complex, if you think about it as a complex design, it's amazing how many things you miss while you're making a design. Even in my third fight, which ended up knocking me out of the tournament, I lost because I forgot to put a couple of screws into my top plate. So it's amazing how day of, I thought I was ready. I put my robot into the arena. It was running great, but I got one unfortunate hit on my robot that ended up just completely knocking out my whole top plate, just popped off and my battery was exposed. And that was because I was rushing too fast to get my robot into the arena, and it just, got disabled.
Well, and not just that, but come on, you were also You were also advertising some of our stuff at the event.
That is
You're
true.
welcoming
Yeah, I was
guests,
doing
and you're like, this is not just the Joe Street that is focused 100% on a robot.
It wasn't Joe Street's only job is to tighten down 2 bolts.
That's right.
It was I'm doing 2 bolts and a million other things this day.
That's right.
Yeah, I was definitely doing a lot of multitasking that day. So I'm partially blame you guys then for that loss.
That's fair. You should. We'll accept that. We'll accept that. Yeah. What we really do is we sponsor losers, right? We sponsor
exactly.
We intentionally
we completely handicap people so that the other team can win. That's right. What we're really hitting.
Exactly. Yeah. 100%.
So cool. Yeah. And Joseph, I think we're so excited to be able to sponsor. I think just if I could shout you out one more time, I know you're usually in the chat side of this and we're saying, hey, our community is a big deal and we really care about you guys and we appreciate the work that you put into our community and to helping expand and grow and answer questions. So while you're on the pod, I just wanted to thank you specifically.
Massive thank you
for reaching out, helping people when they're stuck, just generally being an awesome, supportive community member. It's really nice to have you at CADclass. And I know that there's a reason why we chose to sponsor Rabid as our very first ever CADclass sponsorship. And a large part of that is due to your involvement in our community. So huge shout out, huge thanks to you. I don't want to end the interview
good
now,
vibes as well.
And it's just such good vibes. Yeah, it's been a real pleasure to frankly be a part of this community. I don't know how you feel, Jake, but I don't like we press the go button on the thing, but I don't really feel like I have control. I just feel like I'm like a participant alongside of everybody else. So it's just really nice to have people like you, supportive, helping out,
definitely
throwing your hat in the ring. So it was a pleasure to sponsor Rabid. And go ahead.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm definitely very grateful that I ended up finding you guys, and you kind of indirectly helped me improve my BattleBot and kind of push me to, experiment outside of my comfort zone with these shuffle pods. Because if I hadn't found your course, I would have never even in my life dreamed of designing something this ridiculous. So this is so far out of my comfort zone in terms of Fusion 360 or Autodesk Fusion now. I would have never even thought to try to reverse engineer it.
So hats off to you.
If you guys don't mind, I do want to do a little bit of a shout out to my group.
Plug. Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah. So we are Richmond area bot instigated destruction. We're located in Richmond, Virginia. We do try to host about 3 to 4 events a year. So our next event, we had our last event this past week. We're planning on having our next event probably in the June to July time. So if you guys are interested in that, I can definitely put that in the Discord, make it so everyone know about that. And if anyone is local to the Richmond area, I can definitely point you towards our Discord as well. So you can come out, check it out. If you guys have any questions about combat robotics, I am more than willing to answer. Just shoot me a message in my DMs.
We'll put the link to the Discord in the description below, actually. We can do that.
Awesome. That is fantastic. But yeah, I definitely hope to see you, Josh and Jake,
we will
at one of our future events as well, because it'll definitely be a fun time.
We have to compete in the CADclass arena. So coming down the line, so the next installment we'll have the CADclass arena officially, right? So we had a spray painted logo on the last one, but I can't wait to see this next logo. And I don't know that we'll make it to the next event in June or July, but we have to compete in that arena.
100%. Yeah.
Ideally we make a dud of a bot. We put all this work in. We're so excited.
We'll make a rusty.
We come out and it's just like we're just like everybody else. We're not good. But if you are in the Richmond area, I do want to say also, I don't even think you fully did what you guys are doing justice. It's not very expensive to sign up and actually compete. It's $20 a team, maybe 25 at the high end. It is completely accessible. You can mow somebody's lawn, which is about to be that time, I think, in Virginia where you start mowing lawns, right? Go mow somebody's lawn and you can make enough money to enter the event. Do it 2 or 3 times and you've got the money for your bot. This stuff is completely
How much
accessible.
would you say it is to make a simple £1 bot? Because it's not much more than $100, isn't it?
No, I would say that probably in the ballpark of $100 to $150 to get the very the very basic components to make a very basic combat robot. A lot of the parts that I got for Codebreaker, the first design I bought off of the Amazon for fairly cheap. And like honestly, like you can start off very simple. You can come with a wedge. You can come with like a little lifter arm if you really want to. There's no restriction other than weight size and materials for the 3D printed class. Like Josh was saying, $20 for the 3D printed class, and then $25 for the full combat 1 pound robot.
And free to spectate.
And free to spectate. So if you guys just want to show up at one of our events, just feel free. The doors are always open during our competition times. We don't have a permanent location because we are still very much a new group. We just got our nonprofit status at the beginning of January, so we're still very new, but we're very much looking forward to growing and developing and expanding our reach in the Richmond area for combat robotics.
I dig it, man. It is so fantastic to see it. Got 10 minutes left on the pod, so I just wanted to go down some rapid fire questions on you.
Sure.
What would you say is the next largest scale project that you want to do? We were talking about the big 250-pound ones. Is that something that you want to make in the future? Because those like on the scale of years to design and make, and potentially tens of thousands of dollars. Is that something that you like? That's what I want to get to.
In the grand scheme of things, 250-pound would definitely be something that I aspire to do, getting to eventually. I definitely know that I'm not at that point yet. So my goal personally for me is to just slowly build up my skill in all the classes, from the 3D printed class to the 1 pound to the 3 pound to the 12 pound, and just keep expanding from there. Because, you know, you can always learn things from each class because each class is different, and the design you take in 1 pound might not scale up as well as you hope in like 3 pound or 12 pound.
That's fantastic.
So those are my goals.
I'm really excited to see all the different scale bots, because I know the Long Beach is not too far away from me, and that's where they're having a couple more combat, not battle bots, the show, but they're having some more competitions there. So I'm like, oh, I definitely want to get some tickets for that.
Definitely. If you can just show up to one of those, it'll be a fun time.
I can't wait for that. Really quick, what would you say for someone that's kind of coming into this, what is the hardest part about building the bot? Do you think it's the ideation of it? Is it the design? Is it the electronics? Is it the assembly potentially? Is it the driving? Where is the place where people should really put their kind of time and effort into it?
I mean, it really does depend on the person and their previous knowledge, but I would definitely say that getting familiar with understanding the currents and powers for the batteries is definitely huge. Knowing how to conserve your energy, because with designing your own robot, the limitation is your own creativity. You can really go out there with some really ridiculous plans if you want to, and there's nothing stopping you from doing that. You just have to, keep iterating until you're within that 1 pound category or the 3 pound, whichever one you're trying to reach for. So I would definitely say just getting familiar with the different parts, especially the electronics, would be like the biggest hurdle. But that biggest hurdle can be very easily overcome by just asking questions in your local combat robotics Discord or Facebook group or what have you. Ask questions. That is the biggest help that you can have, because there's so many people, like I said, who are willing to help and just, walk you through it.
I love that. What about someone who is potentially just coming out of college or just coming out of high school? And they really dig the idea, but they have essentially zero practical skills, whether it be with CAD or hands-on making or electronics or coding or anything like that. Where is the first best starting point that they can grow off of?
Honestly, I would say kind of do what I did, where you just buy a kit, get familiar with how to drive a kit robot, get familiar with the electronics, how each electronic component connects to the other, and just start with a kit, get familiar, drive it around, and then just gut the robot and put it into a shell of your own design. Because, you know, there's nothing easier than just taking components that you already know work and putting it into a shell of whatever you want.
Mm-hmm. That's fantastic, man.
We had, besides the weight limit, this is PC Van Vliet or Mr. Mitnick on the Discord. Besides the weight limit, are there other restricted materials?
So depending on the class, especially the 3D printed class, we try to keep to readily available plastics. So PLA, PETG. The event here in Richmond that we host, we also allow TPU, which you can use for your chassis or external
I think I saw
armor.
a TPU bot. It was like the big wheeled, like
Yeah.
smushy bot. I thought that was hilarious.
Yeah, so we do allow TPU. Not all events allow TPU, but we do because we've come to the agreement that the 3D plastic ant class should be very beginner friendly, and there's nothing less beginner friendly than having to do a full robot rebuild between fights. So if you can build yourself some 3D printed TPU armor, that'll make sure that you can just essentially plug your battery in, get it recharged and ready to go out the door for your second fight, we welcome that.
That's fantastic.
But for the most part, it's very, very just basic materials. We don't use carbon fiber. We don't use fiberglass materials. It's very much the basic stuff you can get off of Amazon. Exactly.
The idea is let's make this accessible. And the more exotic it gets and the more competitive advantage you get from the exotic, it's like
100%.
Are we really encouraging people
then it's pay to play, which is no fun.
I don't like pay to play,
No. Yeah, so that's really it. Just PLA, PETG, TPU. I think we allow ABS, but we don't allow nylon or any of the filled materials like carbon fiber or fiberglass. Nothing that's a reinforced material because that's too cheaty for an entry level class, in my opinion.
Yeah. When it's like $100 a kilogram, it's like, yeah,
exactly. It's ridiculous.
Just make it out of aluminum, maybe.
Yeah, just the aluminum billet. Then you're into the full combat class, which you can use whatever material you desire. So
is that rule where it's the 3D printed body or metal body? Is that rules across every single weight class?
So for the most part, if it says full combat, or even generally for 3 pound and above, any material goes. You can make it out of whatever you want. It doesn't have to be too much within any sort of restriction, as long as it's within the weight limit.
250-pound 3D printed robot. I would love to see.
Oh my god, it would it would be too big. It would be way too big.
Take up the whole arena. Just spins around the whole arena.
Yeah, pretty much. But for like the 3D printed class, some groups have varying rules as to what materials you allow. It really comes down to the discretion of the event organizers. But in my opinion, the 1 pound plastic or 3D printed class is the most beginner friendly and entry level class you can have, just because it's, as long as you have a 3D printer and maybe like a couple $100, you can pretty much print anything you would want.
I love that aspect of it.
Amazing.
All right, guys, I think that's going to be it for this podcast.
Has been the CADclass podcast. Once again, this is Joe Street on the stream with Rabbit. If you're in the Richmond area, check him out. And we will see you next week.
Thank you so much, everyone.
See you guys. Take care.